We got a 10-year balanced budget. You can smile, you can stand and clap, you can shout hallelujah. But we appreciate you being here to cover this important work by a lot of very smart, capable leaders on issues of fiscal and broader budget policies. I've got my team behind me that represent what I would say is the fiscal conscience of our Republican conference. And it has never been more necessary to have fiscal hawks and budget champions and people who still believe that if we work together, if we have the discipline and the sense of urgency and the political courage, we can right the ship before it sinks. And we can hand this country to our children better than we found it and not be that first generation of American elected leaders who failed to allow our children to inherit the blessings of liberty. Nobody can look at our broken balance sheet, our unsustainable spending, and the debt that is now $33 trillion and climbing, the highest indebtedness of this nation since World War II, and we're in relative peace and prosperity, and things get worse really fast. No one can look at that. No leader worth their salt in this town can look at it and not shudder at the irreparable harm and the catastrophic consequences, not only for our citizens of today, but generations of Americans who will inherit not the blessings of liberty, but the curse that our fourth president talked about. And by the way, our founders warned us about excessive debt repeatedly. My favorite was what James Madison said: a public debt is a public curse, and in a Republican form of government, the worst of its kind. We don't have to wait for a Greece-like sovereign debt crisis to know the ill effects of this large and growing debt. It's exacerbating the cost of living crisis. It's putting upward pressure on interest and inflation. It's crowding out private investment and therefore growth and our ability to recover. It's squeezing our ability to fund our national priorities like infrastructure, defense, for example. Defense is being funded now per GDP at the lowest levels since pre-World War II. And will probably drop if we don't change course below 3%. Meanwhile, China and other adversaries of ours are making the investment. That's the first and most important job. My point is this. If you have a debt-related crisis, whether it's a slow economic demise, the termites, as they say, at the front porch, or the bear at the front door, where you have a catastrophic, sudden, Greece-like crisis. Either way, we lose the country. We lose future prosperity. We lose our security. We can't put a military on the battlefield to defend our freedom and interest. And again, our children will inherit the whirlwind and a new world order where America is not the leader of the free world. So that's what's at stake. I can't think of anything more important, and I can't think of a threat bigger to the 21st century for this great nation of ours than to do the following: to rein in this out of control spending, especially the mandatory spending that's driving the debt, to restore fiscal responsibility, and to reverse the curse. Here's how we do it in a nutshell as an outline, and then I can get into the details in the Q&A session. First, we've got to get this important work on discretionary done. Don't diminish the importance of right-sizing a bloated bureaucracy that has grown hundreds of billions of dollars since COVID. We have to eliminate the waste, and we have to right-size post-COVID. And we do that in our bill, in our framework, if you will, our 10-year budget blueprint to balance by resetting our next year budget at 22 and controlling spending at 1% a year, which will save over $3 trillion. There are other items under discretionary, but the mandatory spending and the runaway entitlement spending is what's driving the debt. We talk about health care reforms. We talk about welfare reforms. And then we have an assortment of other mandatory programs that we need to make more cost effective, and then, of course, eliminate the waste. Speaking of waste, we now have $2 trillion of wasteful and fraudulent spending in the form of improper payments. When I was a freshman with Drew Ferguson, I think it was 1.5 trillion. It was 1.5 trillion. Last year, the improper payment rate was 250 roughly billion. You got Medicaid at 80 billion last year. You've got the Farm Bill supplemental nutrition at 12 billion. So this shouldn't be a partisan issue. We should find ways to steward the taxpayer dollars in a responsible way and also responsibly make sure the money goes to where it was intended for the people who need it the most. We also reduce interest as we reduce our principal, so we save trillions of dollars there. And then lastly, you can't grow out of a $16 trillion, $33 trillion debt hole, but $16 trillion in order to balance. You can't just grow out of it. But you need to be able to grow faster than your spending. You've got to grow faster than inflation plus population. This budget does that. We return to pro-growth, pro-work, pro-energy policies that we know will reignite this economy, and will return to what we were experiencing before COVID, which is unprecedented growth and prosperity. And when I say prosperity, all boats were lifted up on the tide of a growing economy. We had the lowest poverty rates in recorded history. The lowest unemployment for females, for minorities, for all Americans in recorded history. So this is our plan. This blueprint is the path for our country to balance its budget. We have a surplus of $130 billion. We don't cut Medicare benefits, and we don't cut Social Security or veterans benefits. But let me be clear. In this 10-year window, both the Social Security and the Medicare trust funds will become insolvent. We do what I think is the most practical thing and the most realistic way to address those highly sensitive and highly important safety nets for seniors. We have a recommendation for what you've heard talked about, no doubt, a bipartisan commission to look at that long-term unfunded liability and hash through all the ideas that should be on the table and come up with a consensus, a bipartisan consensus, so we can give seniors peace of mind and so we can make those programs not only solvent but sustainable for future retirees. Folks, that I believe that's what the last time we had to fix these programs and solve these problems, we had Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill basically come up with that consensus, and there was a Greenspan commission that preceded that helped sort of hash through those things. So with that context, I'd like to thank publicly my colleagues for their work on behalf of their constituents. If it's Ralph Norman, it's probably more on behalf of his 17 grandchildren. If you talk to Tom McClintock, he's the senior member on this committee. It's probably his sanity we've saved by having this blueprint. Too late, he says. But I want to say thank you to the team. This was a team effort. Everybody made their contributions, and I couldn't be more proud. You know, you can't have responsible budgeting if you don't have a budget. You can't have the debate, and you certainly can't hash out and cut a path. And you're doomed to fail if you just stand idly by and accept the status quo. These guys don't accept the status quo, and I'm just so thankful for what they did to contribute to our Reverse the Curse plan for restoring fiscal responsibility in this town, in this institution, and for the sake of our children and the greatest nation in the history of the world.